Picture, if you will, a landscape defined not by movement, but by an ancient, heavy stillness. We must allow our minds to drift back, far beyond the chaotic rhythms of the present day, descending slowly through the strata of history until we reach a time of absolute quiet. We are drifting into the sun-bleached expanse of the Chihuahuan Desert, a vast and rugged bowl of heat that straddles the border of what we now call Texas and Mexico. But in this deep past, there are no borders, no maps, and no names. There is only the land, a testament to the raw and violent creative forces of geology. Here, the earth is cracked, parched, and unforgiving, a place where life must fight simply to exist. It is a realm of limestone and dust, a graveyard of ancient oceans where the water retreated millions of years ago, leaving behind a skeletal landscape of calcium and salt. The sun here is not merely a source of light. It is a physical weight, a hammer that strikes the anvil of the earth, day after relentless day. The heat rises in shimmering waves, distorting the horizon, turning the distant mountains into trembling mirages that float above the ground like islands in a sea of fire. In this realm, the silence is not an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a thick, pervasive blanket that smothers the wind and holds the secrets of the stones. It was here, in this crucible of elemental hostility, hidden beneath the jagged shade of creosote bushes and thorny mesquite, that a small, unassuming entity began its slow, quiet biography. It was not a towering tree reaching for the heavens with arrogant branches. It was not a vibrant flower crying out for attention with petals of crimson or gold. It was a humble thing, a spineless, button-shaped cactus, hugging the ground, growing with the patience of geology itself. This is the peyote cactus, the Lophophora williamsii, the green vessel of the molecule we call mescaline. To understand it, one must understand the world that forged it, for the plant is nothing less than the desert distilled into flesh. Long before human eyes ever gazed upon it, the cactus waited. It did not merely grow, it endured. Its story begins in the aftermath of the great geological shifts that dried the heart of the North American continent. As the rainforests retreated and the moisture vanished into the air, the flora of the region was faced with a terrible choice: adapt to the furnace or perish. Most perished, but the ancestors of this small cactus chose a different path. They shed their leaves, those broad surfaces that would only lose precious water to the greedy air. They retracted their limbs, pulling themselves inward, becoming spherical, the most efficient shape in the universe for holding volume while minimizing exposure. They became living cisterns, hoarding every drop of dew, every rare and fleeting rain that fell from the stingy sky. In the hands of evolution, this contraction was a masterpiece of biological architecture. The plant became a fortress. It developed a thick, waxy skin, a cuticle designed to reflect the brutal radiation of the sun and seal the moisture within. It grew low, half buried in the rocky soil, seeking the coolness of the earth rather than the heat of the air. It developed a massive taproot, a carrot-like anchor that delved deep into the limestone fissures, searching for the ghost of water trapped in the darkness below. While the visible part of the plant, the button, might be no larger than a coin or a fist, the life of the plant lay beneath, in the cool, dark earth, a hidden giant sleeping in the stone. But the desert is not just dry, it is hungry. In a land where water is more precious than gold, a succulent plant is a treasure chest, a beacon to every thirsty animal, every insect, every desperate creature seeking relief. How does a soft, spineless plant survive in a world of teeth and claws? Other cacti developed armor, bristling with needles and spikes, declaring war on anything that approached. But the peyote cactus took a different, more subtle path. It chose camouflage. It adopted the color of the dust itself, a dusty, gray-green blue, a hue that vanishes against the backdrop of limestone and shale. It learned to shrink during the droughts, pulling itself flush with the ground, or even retreating beneath the soil, disappearing entirely from view. It became a ghost, a phantom of the flats, visible only to those who knew exactly how to look. And yet, camouflage was not enough. To truly survive, to protect the water stored within its cells, the plant needed a weapon. And so, deep within its tissues, in the microscopic factories of its biology, a great synthesis began. For millennia, it absorbed the relentless energy of the sun and the secrets of the mineral-rich soil, and it began to weave them together. It took the nitrogen from the earth, the carbon from the air, and the hydrogen from the water, and constructed a chemical defense against the harsh world above. It was a slow, deliberate alchemy. The plant began to synthesize alkaloids bitter, potent compounds designed to repulse any mouth that tried to consume it. Foremost among these was the molecule we know as mescaline. To the browsing animal, to the hungry rabbit or the wandering deer, this molecule was a deterrent, a harsh signal of inedibility, a bitter fire on the tongue that said, "Do not eat." It was a shield made not of thorns, but of chemistry. It was a barrier of taste and sensation. But nature is full of ironies, and in creating a defense, the cactus had unknowingly created a key. The very molecule designed to repel the physical world possessed the power to unlock the metaphysical one. The structure of the mescaline molecule, by a twist of cosmic coincidence, resembled the neurotransmitters of the future minds that would one day walk these plains. It was a chemical doppelganger, a molecular mimic capable of slotting into the receptors of consciousness itself. But for millions of years this potential lay dormant. The key existed, but there was no lock to turn, no mind complex enough to experience the visions locked within the bitter flesh. The cactus sat in the silence, a library of unread books, a cathedral with no congregation. The epochs passed like clouds drifting over the mesa. The climate shifted, oscillating between the cold grip of ice ages and the baking ovens of interglacial periods. During the Pleistocene, the landscape around the cactus looked very different. It was wetter, cooler, a savanna of tall grasses and pinyon pines. Great beasts walked the land, casting long shadows over the humble buttons hiding in the grass. We can imagine the earth shaking under the tread of the Columbian mammoth, its curved tusks sweeping through the brush. We can picture the giant ground sloth, Nothrotheriops, lumbering slowly through the valleys, tearing at the vegetation with massive claws. The ancient horse, the camel, the dire wolf, all these ghosts of the past walked beside the peyote cactus. Did they eat it? Perhaps a desperate sloth, driven by drought, took a bite and recoiled at the bitterness. Perhaps the ancient nervous systems of these megafauna experienced a flicker of the psychedelic, a momentary distortion of the senses, a confusion that saved the plant from further destruction. We cannot know. We only know that the animals vanished. The ice retreated, the world warmed, the rains failed, and the desert tightened its grip. The mammoths died, their bones turning to dust in the arroyos. The forests withered and withdrew to the mountain tops. The grasses turned to scrub. And through it all, the little cactus remained. It adapted to the increasing heat, the increasing solitude, watching the world die and be reborn in fire. It became a sentinel of the new order, the master of the arid lands. In this isolation, the plant perfected its stillness. To look at a peyote garden in the wild is to look at a study in patience. A single button, no wider than a child's palm, might be 30, 40, or 50 years old. It grows so slowly that its movement is invisible to the human eye, a geological pace of life that mocks our frantic rushing. It adds a millimeter here, a new tuft of wool there, measuring its life not in days or years, but in rainfall events. It waits for the thunder. When the rare summer monsoons finally break the heat, when the sky turns purple and the lightning shatters the dark, the desert awakens. The water rushes down the dry washes, soaking the limestone. The cactus drinks, swelling rapidly, its ribs expanding like an accordion. And then, in a rare display of softness, it blooms. From the center of the tufted button, a small flower emerges, pale pink or white, sometimes with a throat of yellow. It is a delicate, fleeting thing, standing in stark contrast to the leathery toughness of the plant and the brutal stone surrounding it. It opens to the sun, calling out to the small bees and flies that brave the heat. It offers pollen, life, and beauty in a landscape that seems dead. The flower withers quickly, replaced by a small pink fruit, a chili tapin of sweet flesh containing black seeds. These seeds are carried by ants or washed by the rain into the cracks of the earth to begin the cycle of patience all over again. But for most of its life, the plant simply sits. It sits in the silence of the desert, a silent witness to the shifting stars. At night, the Chihuahuan sky opens up, a dome of infinite black scattered with the diamonds of the Milky Way. The air cools, and the desert breathes. The coyote sings its lonely song to the moon. The owl hunts on silent wings, and the cactus, grounded in the earth, bathed in the starlight, continues its internal work. The synthesis of mescaline does not stop when the sun goes down. In the cool of the night, the chemical pathways continue to churn, converting tyrosine into tyramine, and tyramine into mescaline, stacking the alkaloids like bricks in a wall. There is a profound mystery in this biosynthesis. Why did the plant invest so much energy, so much biological capital into creating this specific compound? Science tells us it is for defense, for stress tolerance, perhaps even to protect against the ultraviolet radiation of the sun. But the poetic mind sees something more. It sees the plant absorbing the harshness of the desert, the blinding light, the crushing heat, the aching thirst, and transmuting it. It takes the suffering of the landscape and turns it into a crystal of strange power. It condenses the vastness of the desert into a microscopic lattice. To eat the cactus is to eat the desert itself, to consume the silence, the age, and the endurance of the stone. For tens of thousands of years, this was the entire universe of the peyote cactus. It was a sovereign entity, a king in a kingdom of dust. It grew in the Mustang Plains, in the rocky ridges of the Rio Grande Valley, in the vast stretches of San Luis Potosi. It lived in colonies, gardens, where thousands of buttons clustered together under the nurse plants, a community of silent souls. It had no name. It had no mythology. It simply was. It is difficult for us, creatures of noise and speed, to comprehend the depth of this solitude. Try to imagine a year in the life of the cactus before the arrival of man. The winter brings a sharp, biting cold, the frost settling on the gray skin. The plant shrivels, pulling down into the warmth of the soil, entering a state of dormancy. The wind howls, carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. Then the spring arrives, not with a burst of green, but with a slow warming of the rock. The sun climbs higher. The heat begins to build. The air dries out until it crackles. The plant wakes, its metabolism stirring. Then the summer hits, a sledgehammer of light. 110 degrees, 115 degrees. The stones are too hot to touch. The air shimmers. The plant sits, unmoving, unflinching, holding its moisture, guarding its bitter treasure. And then the wind changes. A smell of ozone. The clouds pile up, towering white cathedrals turning black at the base. The thunder rolls, a sound like mountains colliding. The rain falls, a curtain of gray. The smell of wet creosote, the smell of rain on hot dust fills the world. The perfume of the desert. The plant drinks. It swells, it flowers. The seeds fall. The cycle turns. Year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. The stars slowly shift their positions in the sky. The magnetic poles drift. The mountains erode by a fraction of an inch. And the cactus remains. It was a masterpiece of biological architecture, hiding a key to the cosmos within its bitter, fibrous flesh. It was a dormant library of visions prepared to endure the weight of time. It contained within it the potential for heavens and hells, for conversations with gods, for the dissolution of the ego, for the healing of the soul. But for now, it was just a plant. It was just a bitter root in the ground. One can imagine the vibration in the earth changing. A new sound enters the desert. Not the hoof of the bison, nor the paw of the wolf. A bipedal rhythm. The soft thud of leather sandals on stone. The sound of a voice speaking a language, giving names to the nameless. The first humans were approaching. They were hunter-gatherers, nomads, people who lived on the knife edge of survival, much like the cactus itself. They were intimate with hunger, intimate with the plants and the animals. They watched the ground. They knew which roots would kill and which would heal. They were moving south, or perhaps north, following the game, following the water. They carried with them their spears, their baskets, and their stories. They were a people of the spirit, seeing the world as a web of living energies. They did not know that the gray-green buttons dotting the limestone ridge held a power that would shape their culture for thousands of years. They did not know that this small plant would become their sacrament, their doctor, and their guide. But the cactus was ready. It had been preparing for this meeting since the dawn of its species. The chemistry was complete. The spirit of the blue deer, as it would later be called, was waiting in the wings of history. The stage was set. The silence of the Stone Age was about to be broken by the song of the peyote ceremony. The solitude of the plant was about to end. But let us pause here, in this final moment of quiet. Let us hold the image of the pristine desert, untouched by human hands. The sun is setting, painting the western sky in bands of bruised purple and burning orange. The shadows stretch out, long and thin. The wind dies down. The first star appears, a pinprick of white fire. Down among the rocks, the peyote cactus sits, cool and gray, blending into the twilight. It is a perfect organism, a survivor, a keeper of secrets. It is the root in the stone silence, the humble beginning of a story that will twist through the minds of shamans, the courts of kings, the laboratories of scientists, and the dreams of poets. It waits. The night deepens. The cosmos wheels overhead. The silence is absolute. But within that silence, there is a vibration, a hum of potential energy. The door is closed, but the key has been forged. The history of mescaline has begun, not with a shout, but with a whisper in the dust, a slow accumulation of molecules in the dark, waiting for the mind that will finally, after eons of waiting, give it a voice. This is the origin. This is the root. This is the stone silence from which the visions will eventually rise, like smoke, into the sky. Thus, the stage is prepared. The land has done its work. The sun has done its work. The biology is set. We leave the era of pure geology and botany, and we stand on the threshold of anthropology. The walker is coming. The hunter is hungry. The deer is moving through the brush, and the plant, the silent protagonist of our story, waits to be found. Consider the improbability of it. Of all the thousands of plants in the desert, of all the defensive chemicals evolved to stop a grazing tooth, this one specific alkaloid, in this one specific cactus, possesses the precise shape to slide into the serotonin receptors of the human brain. It is a lock and key system separated by kingdoms of life, one plant, one animal, yet fitted together with terrifying precision. Is it an accident? A random roll of the genetic dice? Or is there, as the shamans believe, a deeper intention, a woven intelligence in the fabric of the world that intended for this meeting to happen? In the silence of the pre-human desert, the question hangs in the air, unanswered. The wind blows over the limestone. The dust settles. The cactus waits. And we, the observers of this history, wait with it, breathing in the dry, ancient air, feeling the weight of the centuries pressing down, preparing ourselves for the moment when the silence breaks and the visions begin. And so, the sun sets on the age of solitude. The twilight of the cactus gives way to the dawn of the human spirit. But the root remains, deep, tap-rooted, anchored in the stone, it holds the earth. It is the anchor. It is the beginning. It is the roots in the stone silence. Let the winds of time carry us forward, lifting us from the geological silence of the prehistoric earth and setting us down gently into the realm of human memory. The shadows of the great limestone ridges have not changed, but the vibration of the landscape has shifted. Into this theater of heat and dust, a new actor has arrived. They came on foot, silent and observant, moving through the shimmering heat waves with the quiet grace of predators who are also prey. These are the first people, the nomadic hunter-gatherers of the archaic period, wandering the vast, arid plains that stretch across what is now northern Mexico and the American Southwest. To understand their lives, we must strip away the comforts of the modern world. We must imagine an existence where survival was a daily, intimate negotiation with the elements. There were no walls to shut out the wind, no taps to summon water, no guarantee that the sun would not rise on a day of empty stomachs. Hunger was not a temporary inconvenience. It was a constant companion, a shadow that walked beside them, whispering of mortality. Thirst was the currency of the land, and every drop of moisture was a treasure to be hoarded and protected. In this harsh, beautiful crucible, the human spirit was forged, tempered by the relentless sun and the cold, indifferent stars. It is here, in the intersection of desperation and wonder, that legend and anthropology intertwine, whispering stories of how the sacred power of the desert was first discovered. The narrative is not written in ink, but in song and beadwork, passed down through generations of the Wixárika people, known to the world as the Huichol. They tell of a time, long ago, when the people were suffering. The rains had failed, the game had vanished, and the earth had turned to dust. The elders gathered, their faces etched with the lines of worry, and they sent out 4 young hunters to find sustenance, to find a sign from the gods that they had not been abandoned. Picture, if you will, one of these hunters. He is young, his skin bronzed by the sun, his body lean and hardened by the trek. He carries a bow of ash wood and a quiver of arrows, but his strength is failing. He has walked for days without food, subsisting on roots and the meager moisture of cactus pads. He is separated from his companions, lost in the labyrinth of the desert scrub. The silence of the desert presses in on him, a heavy, physical weight. His vision blurs at the edges, the heat creating phantoms in the distant lakes of water that vanish upon approach, trees that dissolve into shadow. He is walking the edge of death, that thin, fragile line where the body begins to shut down and the mind begins to detach from reality. And then, he sees it. In the distance, moving through the tangled mess of mesquite and creosote, there is a deer. But this is no ordinary animal. It does not move with the fearful, jerky motions of a creature hunted. It flows over the ground like water, like smoke. In the mythology of the Wixárika, this is Tamats Kalyumari, the blue deer, the spirit messenger, the elder brother of humanity. To the starving hunter, it is a beacon of hope. He raises his bow, his hands trembling with exhaustion, but he does not fire. Something in the presence of the creature stays his hand. The deer turns its head, locking eyes with the hunter, and in that gaze there is an invitation. It is not fleeing, it is leading. The chase begins. It is a slow, dreamlike pursuit through the canyons and the dry washes. The hunter follows the blue deer, climbing higher into the rocky hills, moving deeper into the sacred land known as Wirikuta. The sun beats down, a relentless drum, but the hunter does not stop. He follows the flash of blue through the gray-green scrub, driven by a force he cannot name. The deer moves effortlessly, leaping over stones and thorns, always just out of reach, always guiding him forward. Finally, the chase reaches its climax. The deer stops in a small clearing, surrounded by the towering silence of the mountains. The hunter creeps forward, his heart pounding against his ribs, his arrow nocked. He draws the string, ready to take the life that will save his people. But as he releases the breath from his lungs, ready to loose the arrow, the deer vanishes. It does not run, it dissolves. In the space of a heartbeat, the magnificent animal melts into the earth, disappearing into the ground as if it were made of mist. The hunter rushes forward, confused, falling to his knees where the deer had stood. He expects to find tracks or perhaps the animal hiding in the brush. But there is no deer. Instead, where the hoof prints of the blue deer should be, the earth is broken by a cluster of small green buttons. They grow low to the ground, arranged in the shape of a deer's footprint, glowing with a strange inner luminosity. They are the peyote cactus. The spirit of the deer has transformed into the flesh of the plant. The animal has become the medicine. The hunter stares at the cactus. He has never seen such a plant before. It has no spines to warn him away, only soft tufts of white wool, like the fur of the deer. He is starving, his body crying out for meat, for blood, for sustenance. But the desert has offered him this root. With trembling hands, he digs into the hard, dry soil. He pulls the button from the earth, dusting off the limestone grit. He slices a piece with his flint knife and raises it to his lips. Imagine the moment of first contact. It is a collision of worlds. The taste is shocking, bitter, acrid, a concentrated essence of the desert's harshness. It is the taste of the alkaloids, the chemical defense we spoke of earlier, a flavor designed to repel. His mouth puckers, his stomach rebels. It is the taste of poison, of danger. Yet, he swallows. He consumes the flesh of the blue deer. He eats the bitterness, trusting in the guidance of the spirit that led him there. He sits back against a rock, waiting. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. At first, there is only the physical sensational wave of nausea, the body's natural rejection of the strange compounds. He feels a tightening in his chest, a heaviness in his limbs. He closes his eyes, perhaps fearing that he has made a fatal mistake, that the desert has finally claimed him. But then, the slow unfurling of the mind begins. It does not happen with a crash, but with the gentle, rhythmic opening of a flower. The nausea subsides, replaced by a warmth that spreads from the stomach to the heart, and from the heart to the head. The hunter opens his eyes, and the world has changed. The desert, once a barren wasteland of gray and brown, has transformed into a cathedral of living color. The light of the setting sun does not merely reflect off the stones, it seems to emanate from within them. The rocks are no longer dead matter, they are breathing, pulsing with a slow, geological heartbeat. The creosote bushes are vibrating with energy, each leaf surrounded by a halo of golden light. The silence of the desert is no longer empty. It is filled with a low, resonant hum, the song of the earth itself. The cactus was no longer a plant. It was an elder, a grandfather spirit that whispered the language of the gods. The hunter looks at his own hands and sees the rivers of life flowing beneath his skin, connecting him to the soil, to the wind, to the stars that are beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The hunger that had gnawed at his belly is gone, replaced by a profound sense of fullness, a nourishment that is not physical but spiritual. He understands, in a flash of intuitive lightning, that he is not separate from the desert. He is the desert. The separation between the observer and the observed dissolves. This is not the chaotic hallucination of a fevered mind. It is a moment of supreme clarity. In the biography of the molecule, this is the moment the key turns in the lock. The mescaline, evolved in the dark silence of the plant, has found its home in the serotonin receptors of the human brain. It creates a bridge, a cascade of neural firing that allows the hunter to perceive the patterns that bind the universe together. He sees the Nierica, the cosmic portal, the doorway to the ancestors. He hears the voice of the blue deer, telling him that his people will survive, that the earth will provide, provided they honor the spirit of the plant. The hunter gathers the buttons, filling his pouch with the sacred medicine. He returns to his people, his step light, his eyes shining with the knowledge of the other world. He brings them the cactus, and they eat. They share the nausea, and they share the vision. The despair lifts. The tribe is united in a collective dream, a shared journey into the spirit realm where they meet the guardians of the rain and the masters of the animals. They are healed. This legend, beautiful and poetic as it is not merely a story. It is a cultural memory, a codification of a profound historical truth. It marks the moment when humanity discovered that the environment contained not just food for the body, but food for the soul. But we need not rely solely on myth to understand this ancient relationship. The dry, preserving air of the desert has kept the physical evidence safe for us, hidden in the darkness of caves, waiting for the brush of the archaeologist to reveal it. Let us travel north from the land of the Wicarica, across the Rio Grande, into the lower Pecos Canyonlands of Texas. Here, the landscape is scarred by deep, winding canyons carved by ancient rivers. In the limestone walls of these canyons, protected by overhanging cliffs, are the Shumla Caves. These natural shelters have served as homes and sacred sites for thousands of years. The air inside is cool, smelling of dust and bat guano, a time capsule sealed against the elements. In the 1930s, and again in more recent years, archaeologists excavated these caves, sifting through the debris of millennia. Amidst the fiber sandals, the broken spear points, and the remnants of hearth fires, they found something extraordinary. They found dried specimens of Lophophora williamsea peyote buttons. These were not fresh. They were desiccated, hardened by time into stone-like discs. But they were unmistakable. When these botanical artifacts were subjected to radiocarbon dating, the results were staggering. The oldest specimens dated back to 5700 BCE. Let the weight of that number settle in your mind. Over 7,000 years ago, long before the pyramids of Giza rose from the sands of Egypt, long before the first stones of Stonehenge were dragged into place on the Salisbury Plain, long before the Sumerians pressed the first cuneiform wedges into wet clay, the people of the Rio Grande were gathering this cactus. The archaeological context gives us a glimpse into the reverence with which these plants were treated. They were not discarded in trash middens. They were often found in special contexts, sometimes shaped into effigies, sometimes mixed with other potent plants like the Texas mountain laurel. In one famous discovery, a string of peyote buttons was found threaded together, a necklace of dried sacrament, perhaps worn by a shaman or a healer as they walked the canyon floors. This physical evidence tells us that the relationship between the human and the plant was not a fleeting experiment. It was a sustained, millennia-long tradition. It was a relationship forged in survival and awe. Imagine the continuity. For thousands of years, fathers taught sons and mothers taught daughters how to identify the small gray-green rosette in the vastness of the scrub. They taught them where to dig, how to cut the top so the root would survive and grow again, an early form of sustainable harvesting that speaks of deep ecological respect. They taught them the songs. The Shumla Caves are famous for their rock art enigmatic, towering figures painted on the canyon walls in red, black, and yellow ochre. These figures, known as the Pecos River style, are surreal and complex. They depict shamans with animal attributes, flying figures, dots and lines that radiate from heads. Many scholars believe these paintings are literal maps of the mescaline experience. They are the visions of the night transcribed onto stone. The shaman, after consuming the cactus, would stand before the wall and paint what he had seen in the other world, the winged serpents, the panther spirits, the geometry of the soul. Think of the cave as a theater. The firelight flickers, casting dancing shadows on the painted walls. The smell of burning sage fills the air. The rhythm of a rattle, made from a dried gourd and pebbles, keeps a steady, hypnotic beat. The people sit in a circle, the dried buttons passing from hand to hand. Outside, the canyon is pitch black, the wind howling through the limestone corridors. But inside, there is light. There is a shared consciousness. This was a sacred covenant between the human soul and the chemistry of the earth. It was born under the vast, unpolluted canopy of the Milky Way, in a time when the stars were the only roof humanity knew. The mescaline molecule became a mediator. In a life that was often brutal, short, and dominated by the struggle for calories, the cactus offered a portal to a dimension of beauty and meaning. It reassured the people that there was an order to the chaos, that there was a spirit behind the stone. It is fascinating to consider the role of the desert itself in this equation. Why here? Why in this desolate land? Perhaps it is because the desert strips away the superfluous. It removes the noise. In the silence of the Chihuahuan Basin, the mind is already primed for introspection. The sensory deprivation of the landscape creates a hunger in the brain, a desire for stimulation. When the mescaline enters this vacuum, it fills it with a torrent of significance. The lack of water enhances the thirst for the spirit. The harshness of the sun makes the inner light seem all the more tender. The starving hunter of the legend is not just a specific individual. He is an archetype of all humanity. We are all, in a sense, starving hunters, wandering the wilderness of existence, looking for meaning, looking for connection. The discovery of the peyote cactus was one of the first times our species found a chemical key to unlock the doors of perception. It was not an escape from reality, but a deepening of it. As the centuries drifted by, the climate changed, empires rose and fell to the south, and new technologies emerged. The bow replaced the atlatl, pottery appeared, but the cactus remained constant. The blue deer continued to run through the brush, leading new generations into the mystery. The knowledge was protected, held close in the oral traditions and the silent rituals of the night. It is important to recognize the duality here. The plant is not a toy. It is bitter. It causes vomiting. It demands a physical price. The indigenous cultures understood this implicitly. They did not view the nausea as a side effect to be avoided, but as a purge, a cleansing of the body to prepare it for the cleansing of the soul. The poison was part of the cure. One had to suffer the bitterness to earn the sweetness of the vision. One had to be the starving hunter, humble and empty, before one could be filled. This is the ancient law of the desert. Nothing is given for free. Life comes from death. Water comes from the stone. Vision comes from the root. And so, the relationship was cemented. The people of the caves and the people of the plains became the people of the peyote. They carried the dried buttons in medicine bundles made of weasel skin and leather. They traded them with tribes far to the north, creating a network of spiritual commerce that spanned the continent. The cactus traveled. It moved from the limestone ridges of Mexico to the camps of the Apache, the Comanche, and the Kiowa. But that is a story for a later chapter. For now, let us rest in this ancient era. Let us sit by the fire in the mouth of the Shumla cave. The night is deep and cold. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of crushed diamonds, a mirror to the Rio Grande flowing below. The shaman is singing a low, guttural song, a melody that mimics the wind. In his hand he holds the dried button, the fossilized spirit of the blue deer. He places it in his mouth. He closes his eyes. The silence of the cave deepens. The breathing of the tribe synchronizes. And slowly, elegantly, the walls of the cave dissolve. The stone melts away. The stars descend to touch the earth. The biography of the molecule merges with the biography of the man. The vision begins. In this sacred space, there is no time. There is only the eternal now, the endless dance of the deer and the hunter, spinning together in the golden light of the mescaline dream. This was the dawn of the psychedelic experience in the Americas, a holy union that would endure persecution, misunderstanding, and the erosion of time, remaining as resilient as the cactus itself, waiting in the dust for those with the eyes to see. We leave them there, in the safety of the cave, in the sanctity of the vision. The first chapter of human interaction with the plant has been written. The covenant is sealed. The blue deer has been caught, and in being caught, it has set the hunter free. The desert sleeps, but its dreams are now vivid, painted in colors that no eye had seen before, born from the marriage of the root and the mind. The silence has been broken, not by noise, but by a song that will echo for 5,000 years. The narrative now settles into the rhythm of the ceremony, a ritual unchanged by the passing of centuries. The fierce, blinding eye of the sun has finally closed, slipping beneath the western horizon, and the desert exhales. The heat that has hammered the limestone all day begins to lift, rising back into the atmosphere like a silent prayer, leaving behind a landscape cooled by the sudden stark drop in temperature. It is in this blue-black transition, this twilight threshold between the harsh reality of the day and the mysterious potential of the night, that the work begins. We must understand that what unfolds here is not a chaotic indulgence. It is a cathedral built of smoke and intention. As the stars begin to puncture the velvet canopy above, the participants gather. They do not come lightly. They come with the weight of their lives, their sorrows, their sicknesses, and their hopes carried in their hearts like stones. They stoop low to enter the sacred space, often a teepee in the modern era, or a simple enclosure of brush and canvas in the older times, stepping from the profane world into the sacred circle. The architecture of the ceremony is a map of the universe. The entrance always faces east, toward the rising sun, the direction of new beginnings and the origin of light. In the center of the lodge, the ground has been carefully prepared. The grass and topsoil have been removed to reveal the bare earth, the mother from whom all life springs. And upon this earth, a master of the fire has been at work. A fire is kindled, but it is not a bonfire of reckless abandon. It is a sculpture of flame. The logs are placed with geometric precision, meeting at a central point where the heat is most intense. As they burn, they are tended by the fireman, a guardian who watches the flames with the intensity of a surgeon. He sweeps the scattered ashes into a specific shape, molding the gray dust into a crescent moon that cradles the fire. This is the moon altar, a symbol of the feminine aspect of the night, the receiver of prayers, the cool reflection of the sun. The fire itself is often referred to as grandfather fire, a living entity, the oldest ancestor present in the circle, the one who carries the messages of the smoke up through the smoke hole at the apex of the teepee and into the waiting sky. Here, the consumption of mescaline was never recreational. It was a disciplined, solemn work of the spirit. The very word used to describe the ceremony is meeting or service, implying a duty, a task to be completed. The participants sit cross-legged on blankets arranged around the perimeter of the circle, forming a human ring that mirrors the horizon. There is no idle chatter. There is no laughter. There is only a heavy, pregnant silence, a collective holding of breath as the sacred items are brought out. The leader of the ceremony, known as the roadman, sits at the western focal point, facing the open door to the east. He is the captain of the vessel, the one who steers the collective soul through the turbulent waters of the night. He places the Father Peyote, a large, perfect, dried button upon the center of the crescent moon altar. This is the focal point, the eye of the storm, the physical representation of the spirit that will guide them. Then, the sound begins. It is not music in the way we usually understand it. It is a sonic technology designed to alter consciousness. The drum begins, a rapid, water-filled heartbeat that mimics the pulse of the womb. This is the water drum, a unique instrument crafted specifically for this vigil. It is made from a small iron or pottery kettle, half filled with water and charcoal, covered with a piece of wet buckskin tied down with stones and rope. When struck with a slender stick, it does not boom, it thrums. It produces a deep, liquid resonance that travels less through the air and more through the ground and the bones of the listeners. It is a rapid, driving rhythm, beating 4 or 5 times per second, a tempo that entrains the brain waves, slowing them from the anxious beta state to the trance-like theta state. Accompanying the drum is the gourd rattle, filled with small stones or glass beads. Its sound is the sound of rain falling on dry leaves, the sound of the spirits moving through the grass. Together, the drum and the rattle weave a sonic tapestry that wraps around the mind, shutting out the distractions of the external world and turning the gaze inward. The singing begins high-pitched, descending melodies that have been sung in this exact manner for generations. These are not songs of entertainment. They are prayer songs, each syllable a key unlocking a specific door in the psyche. The air fills with the scent of cedar and sage, thick and grounding, creating a sensory anchor for the voyages to come. The fireman places dried cedar needles on the coals. A thick, white plume of smoke rises, instantly filling the lodge with a sharp, resinous perfume. This is the breath of the forest, the cleansing agent. The participants bathe their hands and faces in the smoke, washing away the dust of the road and the static of their daily thoughts. The scent triggers a primal response in the brain, signaling that the ritual space is open, that the ordinary rules of time and space are suspended. Then, the medicine is passed. Whether in the form of dried buttons, a tea, or a ground paste, it travels clockwise around the circle, following the path of the sun. As each person takes their portion, there is a moment of hesitation, a recognition of the challenge ahead. The taste is the first guardian. It is overwhelmingly bitter, a flavor that triggers a biological alarm. The body says, poison, but the spirit says, medicine. This is the first test of the night, the surrender of comfort. To partake is to accept the possibility of nausea, of physical purging. The vomiting, if it comes, is not seen as sickness, but as getting well, a physical expulsion of the negative energies, the traumas, and the toxins that the soul has accumulated. As the medicine takes hold, the participants sit in a circle, staring into the embers. The first hour is often a time of physical struggle. The body feels heavy, the stomach churns, the limbs feel like lead. The fire seems to grow hotter, the drum louder, but then, imperceptibly, the shift occurs. The doors of perception creak open. The physical world begins to soften and breathe. The canvas walls of the teepee seem to expand, breathing in and out with the rhythm of the drum. The fire is no longer a collection of burning logs. It becomes a city of light, a landscape of shifting canyons and mountains made of ember and flame. The sparks rising from the fire are not just ash. They are prayers becoming stars. The smoke does not just drift. It dances, forming shapes of animals, faces, and ancestors that dissolve as quickly as they appear. The boundaries between the self and the night sky dissolve. In the ordinary world, we are defined by our edges. My skin ends here, the air begins there. But under the influence of the mescaline, these edges blur. The participant feels the cold earth beneath them not as a surface they are sitting on, but as an extension of their own body. They feel the wind outside the lodge as their own breath. The biography of the molecule merges with the biography of the tribe. The ancient chemical memory stored in the cactus, the memory of the sun, the desert, the endurance, flows into the human bloodstream. The participants do not hallucinate in chaotic bursts. Rather, they see the underlying threads that connect the coyote to the moon, the stone to the ancestor. The vision is rarely a fantasy of things that are not there. It is a revelation of the things that are there, but are usually invisible to us. They see the Neerica, the cosmic web. They might look at the person sitting across the fire and see not just a neighbor, but a lineages, seeing the face of the father, the grandfather, the great-grandfather, all present in the set of a jaw or the cast of an eye. They might look at the fire and understand the transformation of energy, seeing the sunlight that the tree absorbed decades ago now being released back into the room as heat. It is a long, arduous night of prayer and introspection. There is no sleep. The mind is awake, hyper-alert, moving through the corridors of memory with a lantern. The cactus acts as a stern but loving teacher. It is often said that peyote does not lie. It holds up a mirror to the soul, a mirror that cannot be fogged by excuses or rationalizations. If a man has been cruel to his wife, the medicine will make him feel that cruelty, as if it were his own physical pain. If a woman has been grieving a loss, The medicine will take her into the center of that grief, forcing her to hold it, to examine it, and finally, to release it. This is the bad trip that the recreational user fears, but for the ceremonial participant, this is the work. This is why they came. To confront the shadow, to weep the tears that have been held back for years, to forgive and to be forgiven. The sound of weeping is common in the lodge, a raw human sound that mixes with the beat of the drum, but it is always followed by the sound of the song, the reassurance that the struggle is witnessed and supported by the community. The night is divided into 4 quarters, marked by specific rituals. At midnight, the drumming stops. The silence that rushes in is deafening. The roadman calls for water. A bucket of water is brought in, blessed with smoke and prayer. This is the midnight water, the water of life. It is passed around the circle, and the taste of it is indescribable. To the parched throat, to the senses heightened by the medicine, this simple ladle of water tastes like the sweetest nectar, like the first drink from a mountain spring. It reminds the participants of the preciousness of life, of the simple miracle of existence. After midnight, the energy shifts. The heavy, purging work of the early hours begins to lift. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing coals, a landscape of deep, pulsing red. The songs become lighter, more joyful. The visions become more ethereal. The mind, having faced its demons, is now free to explore the upper realms. Picture the scene inside the lodge at 3 a.m. The firelight casts long, dancing shadows on the canvas walls. The air is thick with sage and the metallic tang of ozone. The drummer is drenched in sweat, his arm moving in a blur, maintaining the rhythm that has held them all together for hours. The participants are wrapped in their blankets, looking like stone statues, but inside, they are flying. They are traveling through the Milky Way. They are running with the wolves. They are sitting at the feet of their ancestors. They are engaged in a collective dreaming, because they are all listening to the same rhythm, smelling the same smoke, focusing on the same fire, and ingesting the same sacrament. Their minds begin to synchronize. It is not uncommon for people to share visions, to see the same eagle flying through the smoke hole, to feel the same presence entering the room. The individual ego, usually a fortress of isolation, becomes porous. The tribe becomes a single organism, breathing together, healing together. The night seems to last forever, a timeless epic where a minute can feel like an hour, and an hour can pass in the blink of an eye. But eventually, the cycle of the stars dictates the end. The morning star rises in the east, visible through the open door. The darkness begins to turn gray. The birds outside begin their pre-dawn chorus, their songs weaving into the rhythm of the rattle. The morning water is brought in, often by a woman who represents the water woman, the mother of all waters. She prays over the bucket, her voice soft and melodious, a counterpoint to the male energy of the drum. She speaks of birth, of the water that breaks before the child comes, of the water that nourishes the corn. When this water is drunk, it signals the beginning of the return. The participants begin to come back to their bodies. They stretch their stiff limbs. They look at each other, their faces weary but shining with a strange, translucent light. They have traveled to the other side of the universe and returned. They have died a small death and been reborn. As the first true rays of the sun strike the top of the teepee, the drum stops. The sudden silence is shocking. The fire is now just a bed of white ash, carefully shaped into the crescent moon, a record of the night's heat. The door is thrown open, and the light of the new day floods in. It is blindingly bright, sharp, and clear. The world outside looks newly made. The colors of the grass and the sky are vibrant, washed clean by the night's rain of visions. The participants emerge from the lodge, blinking in the sunlight. They are exhausted, their bodies depleted, but their spirits are full. They hug each other, a physical affirmation of the bond forged in the dark. They have walked the peyote road together. They have sat in the smoke and the ash, and they have kept the midnight vigil. The cactus, the stern teacher, has done its work. It has taken them apart and put them back together, leaving them a little wiser, a little softer, and deeply, profoundly connected to the roots of the stone silence from which they came. The biography of the molecule has added another chapter to the biography of the soul. The ceremony is over, but the medicine continues to work, a quiet hum in the background of their lives, a reminder of the night when they saw the threads that hold the world together. The wheel of history turns, heavy and grinding, bringing with it the dust of conquering armies and the shadow of a new god. We must leave the timeless tranquility of the cave and the open sky and turn our gaze toward the horizon, where the shape of the world is about to change. It is the 16th century. Across the vast, turbulent Atlantic, the wooden galleons of Spain are cutting through the waves, their sails billowing with the winds of empire. They carry a cargo that will shatter the silence of the desert: steel, gunpowder, the cross, and the sword. When the Spanish conquistadors and the Franciscan friars first set foot upon the soil of the New World, they did not merely arrive in a new land. They arrived in a new metaphysical dimension. To the European mind, fresh from the religious wars of the Old World, the universe was a rigid hierarchy. God sat at the apex, the king and the pope below him, and the structure of the church acted as the sole authorized conduit for divine grace. Salvation was a matter of obedience, of scripture, and of sacrament administered by ordained hands. The wild, chaotic, direct spirituality of the indigenous peoples was not just alien to them, it was terrifying. They marched north from the Valley of Mexico, pushing into the arid lands where the Chichimeca and other tribes wandered. And there, amidst the dust and the heat, they encountered the peyote cactus. But they did not see it with the eyes of the starving hunter. They did not see the blue deer. They saw a threat. They saw a rival. Picture the collision of these two worldviews. On one side, the indigenous shaman, naked or clad in skins, chanting to the spirits of the wind and the coyote, holding a dried root that opened the doors of the mind to a universe of living color. On the other side, the black-robed inquisitor, clutching a leather-bound Bible, viewing the world through the lens of sin and demonology. When the friars witnessed the night-long vigils, the drumming, the weeping, and the ecstatic trances, they did not see a cure for the soul. They saw the devil at work. To the strict, dogmatic mind of the Spanish clergy, there was no room for a plant that allowed a common man to speak directly to God. If a humble peasant could eat a cactus and see the face of the Creator, what need was there for the priest? What need was there for the tithe, for the confession booth, for the grand cathedrals being raised on the foundations of destroyed temples? The cactus represented a democratization of the divine, a spiritual anarchy that threatened the very foundations of colonial control. And so, the designation was made. The plant was not called medicine. It was branded Raíz Diabólica, the devil's root. The Inquisition, that terrifying machinery of religious purity that had scoured the heretics from the streets of Europe, turned its cold, bureaucratic gaze toward the flora of the American desert. They declared the consumption of peyote to be a heresy of the highest order, a tool of witchcraft that led souls astray into madness and idolatry. Thus began a war of shadows. It was a strange, asymmetrical conflict. On one side was the greatest empire on earth, armed with muskets, edicts, and the threat of eternal damnation. On the other side was a small, spineless cactus and the people who loved it. The missionaries launched a campaign of extirpation. They sought to stamp out the plant with the same fervor they used to smash the stone idols of the Aztecs. Imagine the scene in a dusty mission courtyard in the year 1620. The inquisitors have gathered the local population. A proclamation is read aloud, the heavy Castilian Spanish echoing off the adobe walls. It condemns the use of the herb as a deception of Satan. It claims that the visions seen under its influence are not revelations, but hallucinations sent by the Prince of Lies to ensnare the soul. The document explicitly forbids the harvesting, trading, or consuming of the plant. To possess it is a crime against God and the king. The tragic irony of this moment echoes through the centuries. Here was a tool for peace, a sacrament used to heal the sick, to resolve conflict, and to connect the human heart to the beauty of the earth. And yet, it was being persecuted as an instrument of evil. The Spanish looked at a circle of men praying for the health of their families and saw a coven of witches. They looked at the tears of a penitent and saw the madness of the possessed. It was a blindness born of fear, a refusal to accept that the divine could manifest in a form that was not written in Latin or carved in marble. But the spirit of the plant was resilient, much like the desert from which it sprang. You can burn a wooden idol. You can melt down a gold ornament. You can tear down a stone pyramid. But how do you destroy a root that lives in the stone? How do you arrest a plant that grows in the millions across a wilderness that your armies can barely traverse? The practice did not die. It went underground. It retreated into the shadows, hidden in the folds of silence and secrecy. The indigenous people, outwardly converting to Christianity to survive, kept the old ways alive in the privacy of the night. The midnight vigil took on a new, literal meaning. It became a secret meeting, held far from the prying eyes of the priests, deep in the arroyos or high in the mountains where the soldiers would not go. The cactus became a symbol of resistance. To eat it was to refuse the spiritual conquest. To harvest it was to assert one's identity in the face of erasure. The biography of the molecule entered a phase of espionage. The buttons were no longer worn openly on necklaces. They were sewn into the linings of clothes, hidden in the bottoms of grain sacks, buried beneath the floors of the adobe huts. The shamans adapted. They began to blend the symbols of the new religion with the power of the old. This is the seed of the syncretism we see today. If the priests demanded prayers to Jesus, the pietists would pray to Jesus, but they would understand him as another manifestation of the blue deer, another healer who walked the earth. If the priests spoke of the Holy Spirit, the pietists would nod, knowing that the Holy Spirit blew through the sagebrush and lived in the bitter flesh of the medicine. While cathedrals were built of stone in the cities, massive, imposing structures designed to dwarf the human observer, the true temple remained in the wilderness. The peyote circle needed no walls. Its roof was the sky, which the Spanish could not claim. Its altar was the earth, which the Spanish could not carry away. The church was static, fixed in place, heavy with gold and gilt. The peyote ceremony was mobile, light, carried in a pouch, ready to move as the people moved. Consider the psychological weight of this era for the indigenous practitioner. To partake of the sacrament was to risk everything: flogging, imprisonment, or worse. The bad trip was no longer just a psychological struggle. It was a real-world possibility. The paranoia of the Inquisition seeped into the ceremony. Every snapping twig outside the circle could be a soldier. Every distinct smell of the burning cedar could betray their location. And yet, they continued. Why? Why risk so much for a plant? Because it was the only thing that remained true in a world that had turned upside down. The Spanish had taken their land. They had taken their freedom. They had taken their public dignity. But they could not take the vision. When the eyes were closed and the medicine took hold, the conquistadors vanished. The missions crumbled. The fences dissolved. The world returned to its original sacred state. In the vision, the connection to the ancestors was unbroken. The lineage was preserved. The Inquisition's records from this time are filled with confused and frustrated reports. Priests would write to their superiors in Mexico City or Madrid, complaining that despite their best efforts, the vice continued. They described finding idols made of dough and cactus. They described natives who would confess to all sins except the sin of the plant, regarding it as outside the jurisdiction of the priest. They could not understand a faith that was not based on fear, but on direct experience. There is a specific account from the archives where a priest interrogates an old man found with the dried buttons. The priest asks, "Why do you eat this root of the devil?" and the old man, perhaps with the weary patience of the desert itself, replies, "Because it tells me things that you cannot read in your book." In that simple exchange lies the entire conflict, the authority of the text versus the authority of the experience, the dogma versus the divine. The War of Shadows lasted for centuries. The Spanish Empire eventually waned, its silver mines exhausted, its power crumbling under the weight of its own bureaucracy. The maps changed. The flags changed. Mexico fought for independence. But through all the political upheavals, the silent war over the cactus continued. The stigma planted by the Inquisition took deep root in the cultural consciousness of the ruling classes. Even after the Spanish left, the idea of peyote as dirty, primitive, or madness-inducing remained. But the plant endured. It endured because it was protected by the very landscape that made it strong. The Chihuahuan Desert is not a place that welcomes the casual invader. It is a fortress of heat and thorns. The Spanish soldiers, weighed down by their armor and their horses, could not police every canyon, every ridge, every hidden valley. The geography conspired with the biology to save the tradition. The cactus grew in places where the empire could not reach. As we look back on this dark chapter, we see the tragic irony, but we also see the triumph of the human spirit. The Inquisition, for all its power, failed. It failed because it tried to kill a spiritual truth with a physical weapon. It tried to legislate the chemistry of the brain. It tried to erect a wall between the human soul and the natural world, a wall that the little green button could effortlessly dissolve. The shadows of the Inquisition were long and cold, casting a pall over the indigenous history of the Americas. They brought pain, secrecy, and shame. But they also forged a diamond-hard resilience in the peyote cultures. The ceremony became tougher, tighter, more disciplined. The survival of the plant became synonymous with the survival of the people. And so, as the 17th and 18th centuries ground on, the peyote flame was kept burning, not in the great plazas, but in the remote, hidden corners of the world. It burned in the dark, a small, secret fire shielded by cupped hands. It waited for a time when the world might be ready to understand it again. It waited for the blue deer to emerge from hiding. The armies marched on. The priests grew old and died. The stone cathedrals began to crack under the sun. But in the silence of the desert, the peyote cactus continued to grow, slowly adding millimeter by millimeter to its girth, indifferent to the edicts of men, listening only to the wind and the stars. The darkness of the persecution had not extinguished the light. It had only made the eventual dawn that much more brilliant. The root remained, the lineage remained, and the visions, though hidden, were never lost. We move now, carried by the mournful winds of history, to the late 19th century. We leave the stone silence of the ancient desert and travel north, across the rolling prairies and the vast open skies of the Great Plains. But the sky here is not clear. It is choked with the smoke of burning villages and the dust of a vanishing world. This is a time of immense sorrow and upheaval for the Native American tribes, a period often referred to as the twilight of the plains. The world as they knew it was ending. The buffalo, the great, shaggy monarchs that had sustained their bodies and their spirits for 10,000 years, were gone, slaughtered in their millions, leaving the prairies silent and empty, littered with bleaching bones. The lands were being fenced by barbed wire, that iron thorn that cut the open range into parcels of property. The old ways, the sun dance, the buffalo hunt, the freedom to follow the seasons, were fading like smoke in the wind, dispersed by the relentless march of the railroad and the rifle. It was in this vacuum of despair, in this hollow silence left by the genocide of the bison and the confinement of the tribes onto reservations, that the mescaline cactus began its most remarkable journey. It traveled north, far beyond its natural habitat in the limestone ridges of the Rio Grande Valley. It was not carried by the wind or the birds, but by the hands of men who were searching for a way to survive the end of their world. It was carried in the saddlebags of the Comanches, the lords of the plains, who had once ruled a vast empire of grass. It was carried by the Kiowas, the keepers of the calendar histories. It was carried by the Apaches, the fierce defenders of the mountains. The story of this migration is inextricably linked to the figure of Quanah Parker. Picture him, if you will, the last chief of the Comanches, a man who straddled two worlds with the grace and tragedy of a Greek hero. The son of a Comanche war chief and a captured white woman, Cynthia Ann Parker, Quanah was a fierce warrior who had fought the Texas Rangers and the U.S. cavalry to a standstill on the Llano Estacado. He had known the freedom of the high plains, the thrill of the raid, and the deep connection to the land. But he had also known defeat. He had seen his people starving, his family shattered, and his way of life crushed under the weight of industrial expansion. When Quanah Parker surrendered at Fort Sill in 1875, he was not just a defeated general. He was a man in search of a new soul for his people. The old medicine had failed to stop the bullets. The old prayers had not brought back the buffalo. In this moment of existential crisis, when the Comanche nation was confined to the reservation, battling disease, alcoholism, and a profound, crushing depression, Quanah turned to the south. He turned to the cactus. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal but spiritually true, that tells of Quanah's own healing. It is said that he was gravely ill, perhaps from a wound received in battle or from the sickness of the reservation. He was visited by a curandera, a healer from the south, who gave him a tea made from the peyote cactus. In the fevered dreams that followed, Quanah did not see the violence of the battlefield. He saw a path of peace. He saw a way to navigate the new world without losing the heart of the old. He saw that the white man's Jesus and the Indian's Great Spirit were not enemies, but could be reconciled through the mediation of the plant. Parker became the great evangelist of the Peyote Road. He recognized that the tribes could no longer fight with arrows and lances. They had to fight with the spirit. They had to fight with dignity. And so, he took the ancient ceremony of the desert, the ceremony of the starving hunter and the stone silence, and he adapted it. He molded it to fit the needs of the reservation life. He blended the ancient cactus ceremony with elements of Christianity, creating a syncretic faith that would become the Native American church. This was a radical act of theological engineering. Parker understood that to survive in a Christian nation, the indigenous religion needed a shield. By incorporating the Bible, the name of Jesus, and the cross into the peyote meeting, he created a spiritual fortress that the government agents and the missionaries found difficult to attack. He taught that the peyote was the flesh of God, a sacrament given specifically to the Indian people because they were too poor to own Bibles and too humble to read them. He said, "The white man goes into his church and talks about Jesus. The Indian goes into his teepee and talks to Jesus." Under Parker's influence, and the influence of other leaders like John Wilson of the Caddo and the Delaware Prophets, the religion spread like wildfire across the Great Plains. It moved from the Comanche to the Kiowa, to the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Pawnee, and the Osage. It crossed linguistic barriers and tribal enmities. Former enemies who had warred against each other for centuries now sat together in the same teepee, passing the same drum, eating the same medicine. The plant became a unifier, a distinct identity for disparate tribes banding together against cultural erasure. Picture the scene inside a canvas teepee on an Oklahoma reservation in the late 1890s. Outside, the wind howls across the desolate landscape of the allotment, whistling through the barbed wire fences. It is a bleak world of poverty, of government rations, of boarding schools where children are beaten for speaking their mother tongue. But inside the teepee, a different world exists. The fire is burning in the center, shaped into the familiar crescent moon, the half-moon altar that gives this chapter of history its name. The air is thick with the smell of cedar and tobacco. Men and women sit shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in colorful wool blankets. The drum begins its rapid, steady beat, the heartbeat of the earth that has not forgotten them. The gourd rattle shakes, sounding like the rain that will one day return. The medicine is past. It is bitter, as always. It is the taste of the suffering of their people. It is the taste of the trail of tears, of the massacre at Wounded Knee, of the long walk of the Navajo. As they chew the buttons, they are ingesting their own history, metabolizing their grief. The nausea comes, the purging of the pain, and then the peace. As the mescaline takes hold, the walls of the reservation dissolve. The participants look at the fire and see the spirits of the buffalo returning. They see the faces of their ancestors, unscarred and proud, smiling at them from the flames. They hear the songs of the old days, not as mournful echoes, but as living vibrations. The biography of the molecule merges with the biography of the oppressed. The cactus shows them that although their land has been taken, their souls remain free. It shows them that the Great Spirit has not abandoned them. He has merely changed his shape, hiding in the green garden of the peyote to be with them in their darkest hour. The ceremony became a place of profound healing for the trauma of displacement. In the teepee, a man was not a ward of the state or a lazy Indian, as the agents called him. He was a warrior of the spirit. He was a brother. He was a son of the sun. A woman was not a domestic servant. She was the water woman, the bringer of life. The ritual restored the social fabric that the reservation system had torn apart. It gave structure, discipline, and meaning to lives that had been stripped of purpose. The half-moon altar itself is a symbol of this transition. In the old desert ceremonies, the altar was often a simple depression in the sand. But on the plains, it became an elaborate sculpture of earth or ash, shaped like a crescent moon. Along the ridge of the moon, the roadman would draw a line representing the peyote road, the difficult but righteous path through life. This road led from birth to death, from ignorance to wisdom. To walk the peyote road meant to abstain from alcohol, the bad medicine that was destroying the tribe. To be faithful to one's spouse, to work hard, and to care for one's family. This ethical code was crucial. The peyote religion was not an escapist cult, it was a movement of moral regeneration. The cactus was the enforcer. If a man came to the meeting with a heart full of hate or a belly full of whiskey, the medicine would turn on him. It would make him confront his weakness, twisting his stomach and his mind until he purged the poison and begged for forgiveness. It was a stern therapy, but it worked. Thousands of men and women credited the cactus with saving them from the bottle and the despair of the reservation. The spread of the religion was not without opposition. The missionaries and the Indian agents were furious. They saw the peyote meetings as a relapse into savagery, a hindrance to the civilizing process. They railed against the drug-crazed Indians and lobbied Washington to ban the cactus. They sent police to raid the teepees, to confiscate the medicine, to arrest the roadmen. But the Native American church fought back. They used the white man's own laws against him. They incorporated legally. They hired lawyers. They argued that the use of peyote was a bona fide religious sacrament, protected by the First Amendment. Quanah Parker, in his brilliance, invited the white politicians and anthropologists to the meetings. He let them see the solemnity, the prayer, the tears. He challenged them to find the orgy they had preached about. Most who came left humbled, recognizing that they were in the presence of a genuine faith. One of the most poignant aspects of this era is the music. The peyote songs of the Native American church are a unique genre, distinct from the old war songs or the dance songs. They are fast, rhythmic, accompanied by the water drum and the rattle. They are sung in a special vocable style, using syllables that have no literal meaning, but carry a deep emotional charge. These songs traveled from tribe to tribe. A song composed by a Kiowa in Oklahoma might be sung by a Navajo in Arizona or a Winnebago in Nebraska. The music became a common language, a sonic thread binding the nations together. Imagine the sound of those songs drifting across the darkened plains in the year 1910. The settler in his farmhouse, miles away, might hear the faint, rapid thrumming of the drum and the high-pitched falsetto of the singers. To him, it might sound alien, perhaps frightening, the sound of the wild refusing to be tamed. But to the people in the teepee, it was the sound of home. It was the sound of survival. The cactus also facilitated a new kind of intertribal diplomacy. The need to obtain the medicine meant that the northern tribes had to travel south to the peyote gardens in Texas and Mexico, or establish trade routes with the Comanches and others who had access. This pilgrimage became a sacred journey. Men would pool their meager resources to buy a train ticket or fuel a jalopy to travel to Laredo or Mirando City. There, they would meet the peyoteros, the Hispanic dealers who harvested the plant. They would gather the sacks of green buttons, treating them with the reverence due to holy relics, and bring them back to the frozen north. This commerce of the spirit created a network of friendship and solidarity that defied the isolation of the reservation system. A Navajo healer might stay with a Cheyenne family. A Potawatomi roadman might lead a meeting for the Ute. They shared techniques, songs, and variations of the ritual. The half-moon style of Parker was joined by the crossfire style, which was even more Christianized, rejecting the use of tobacco and placing the Bible on the altar. But despite these differences, the central fire was the same. The central medicine was the same. The mescaline molecule, in this context, was doing something profound. It was acting as a cultural preservative. In the hallucinogenic state, the cultural memory was accessible. The old stories were not just remembered, they were relived. A young man who had never seen a buffalo hunt could, under the influence of the medicine, feel the thundering hooves and the rush of the wind. He could connect with the spirit of a grandfather he had never known. The cultural erasure intended by the boarding schools, where the motto was, "Kill the Indian, save the man," was counteracted by the weekend meetings. In the teepee, the Indian was resurrected. It is a tragic irony that a tool for peace and connection became the target of such intense persecution. Yet, it is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The Native American church did not just survive, it thrived. It became the largest indigenous religious movement in North America. It offered a third way, neither a retreat into a dead past nor a total assimilation into the white world. It was a new path, paved with the green buttons of the cactus, leading toward a future where an Indian could be a modern American and still keep his soul. Let us return to the scene in the teepee as the night wears on. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing red coals, shaped into the perfect crescent. The ash man carefully sweeps the hearth, making the altar beautiful. The water drum is passed to a young man who is drumming for the first time. He is nervous, his hand trembling on the stick. But the older men nod at him, encouraging him. He finds the rhythm, that rapid, driving heartbeat. He closes his eyes. The song rises from his throat, a high, clear cry that pierces the canvas and rises to the stars. In that moment, the despair of the reservation is gone. The poverty is forgotten. There is only the drum, the fire, and the medicine. The cactus has done its work. It has taken the broken shards of a culture and glued them back together with visions of gold and light. It has turned the trauma of the past into the strength of the present. The half-moon altar is not just a pile of ash. It is a monument to survival. It is the mountain that the people climbed to escape the flood of history. And at the top of that mountain, they found the peyote cactus waiting for them, offering them a hand to hold as they walked through the darkness of the 20th century. The sun begins to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pale pink and blue. The meeting is ending. The morning water is past. The woman who brings it prays for her children, for her husband, for the people. She prays for the soldiers fighting in foreign wars, for the sick in the hospitals, for the leaders in Washington. Her prayer is inclusive, forgiving, expansive. It is the prayer of a people who have looked into the heart of the cactus and seen that all life is one. The door is opened. The participants step out into the morning air. The wind is still blowing across the plains, but it no longer feels like the wind of destruction. It feels like the breath of the world. They are tired, but they are clean. They have their dignity, they have their identity, and they have the secret knowledge that as long as the cactus grows in the desert, and as long as the drum beats in the teepee, the people will not vanish. They will endure. The mescaline cactus, the root in the stone silence, has become the savior of the plains. It has completed another leg of its journey, moving from the geological solitude of the desert to the communal salvation of the reservation. But its journey is not over. The world is changing again. The 20th century is accelerating. Science is awakening to the mysteries of the mind. And far away, in the laboratories of Europe, men in white coats are beginning to ask questions that the shamans have already answered. The molecule is about to be isolated. The crystal is about to be born. The story shifts now, moving away from the smoke-filled teepees of the Great Plains and the sun-baked canyons of the Rio Grande. We leave behind the rhythmic beating of the water drum and the smell of burning cedar to enter a world of a completely different vibration. We find ourselves in the quiet, sterile air of a German laboratory at the end of the 19th century. It is 1897 in the city of Leipzig. The industrial age is in full swing. The world is being measured, weighed, and categorized. The gaslights hiss softly in the corridors of the Pharmacological Institute, casting a pale, yellow glow over rows of glass beakers, brass scales, and leather-bound journals. Here, the scientific mind, obsessed with dissecting the mysteries of nature to understand their mechanics, has turned its gaze toward the divine plant of the Americas. The rumors of the cactus had traveled across the Atlantic, carried in the reports of travelers and ethnographers who spoke of a dry whiskey or a devil's root that caused men to see visions. To the rationalists of Europe, these accounts were not spiritual truths, but pharmacological puzzles. They did not see a spirit, they saw a chemical compound waiting to be named. Enter Arthur Hefter, a man of discipline and rigor, a pioneer in the burgeoning field of pharmacology. Hefter was not a mystic. He was a scientist, a man who believed that the secrets of life could be revealed through the precise application of the scientific method. He stood in his laboratory, holding the dried buttons of Lophophora williamsii in his hand. They were wrinkled, gray, and unassuming dusty artifacts from a primitive world. But Hefter suspected that locked within this fibrous matrix was a potent alkaloid, a principle that acted upon the nervous system. What followed was a daring act of self-experimentation, a moment where the cold objectivity of science collided with the subjective fire of the psychedelic experience. Hefter knew that animal studies could only tell him so much. A rabbit or a dog could not describe a hallucination. To truly understand the cactus, he had to become the subject. He had to offer his own mind as the petri dish. Hefter began a systematic chemical dissection. Using solvents and acids, he broke down the cactus material, separating it into its constituent parts. He isolated several distinct alkaloids, pelletine, anhelonidine, lophophorine, and a fourth fraction he had yet to identify. But which one was the key? Which one held the lightning? There was only one way to find out. On a quiet afternoon, Hefter dissolved a measured dose of the first alkaloid, pelletine, in water and drank it. He waited, pen in hand, observing his own physiology. He felt tired, a heavy sedation, but no visions. He recorded the result, a sedative, not the visionary agent. He waited for the effects to clear. Days later, he tried the next compound. Again, physical symptoms, perhaps a trembling, a nausea, but the world remained stubbornly mundane. The walls did not breathe, the colors did not shift. He was stripping away the layers of the plant, searching for its heart. Finally, he came to the fourth fraction. It was November 23, 1897. Hefter measured out 150 milligrams of the alkaloid hydrochloride. He dissolved the white crystals in water. The taste was familiar, bitter, metallic, the taste of the desert. He drank it. For a time, nothing happened. He sat at his desk, perhaps checking his pocket watch, perhaps wondering if the experiment was another failure. But then, the change began. It started not with a drowsiness, but with a strange electric alertness, The light in the room seemed to brighten. The pattern of the carpet began to vibrate. He closed his eyes, and the darkness behind his eyelids was no longer black. It was alive. Hefter later wrote of violet and green spots that evolved into beautifully colored arabesques. He saw carpets, embroidery, and diadems of immense complexity. The visions were autonomous. They moved and changed with a life of their own, indifferent to his will. He looked at the gas flame of the lamp and saw a fountain of gems. He looked at his own hand and saw the pulse of life. In that solitary moment, in a room smelling of ether and old paper, Arthur Hefter had achieved a monumental breakthrough. He had isolated the soul of a psychedelic plant into a single chemical structure. He had captured the blue deer in a test tube. He identified the compound as 3,4,5-trimethoxyphenethylamine. He named it mescaline. In this moment, the sacred button was translated into the language of Western science. The mystery was now a molecule, a precise arrangement of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. It was no longer a gift from the spirits. It was a substance with a melting point, a molecular weight, and a crystalline structure. It could be weighed, measured, synthesized, and stored in a jar. Yet, even under the microscope, the magic refused to be fully demystified. Hefter could describe the structure of the key, but he could not explain the room it opened. He could draw the hexagonal ring of the benzene nucleus, the side chain of the ethylamine, but he could not account for the feeling of awe, the sense of the holy, the profound emotional resonance that accompanied the visions. The science explained the how of the molecule's interaction with the brain, but it remained silent on the why. The isolation of the compound changed everything. It allowed the spirit of the cactus to travel further than the plant ever could. The peyote cactus is a fussy organism. It requires specific soil, specific heat, and years of growth. It is heavy to transport and illegal in many places. But mescaline sulfate? Mescaline hydrochloride? These were white salts, stable, pure, and easily shipped. The molecule moved out of the botanical gardens and into the clinical world. It traveled to the great centers of European intellect, to Vienna, Berlin, and Paris. It found its way into the hands of psychiatrists, neurologists, and philosophers who were eager to map the unknown territories of the human mind. In the early 20th century, a new kind of explorer emerged. These were not men in buckskins walking the desert. They were men in tweed suits sitting in consulting rooms. They were the psychonauts of the era. They studied mescaline not for ritual, but for the secrets of the human subconscious. They were interested in model psychose, the idea that mescaline could induce a temporary, reversible state of psychosis, allowing doctors to study schizophrenia from the inside out. They administered the drug to volunteers, often medical students, artists, or fellow doctors. They sat by them with clipboards, recording every utterance, every twitch. Subject reports seeing a Gothic cathedral made of light, they would write. Subject experiences a dissolution of the ego boundaries. Subject laughs uncontrollably at the concept of time. One of the most famous of these early explorers was Kurt Beringer, a German psychiatrist who in the 1920s conducted hundreds of mescaline experiments. His book, Der Mescalinrausch, The Mescaline Intoxication, became a classic of the genre. Beringer documented the phenomenology of the experience with German precision. The synesthesia, seeing sounds, hearing colors, the distortion of space, the feeling of infinite significance in trivial objects. But something strange happened in these sterile laboratories. The scientists, intending to study madness, often found themselves stumbling into mysticism. A subject given the drug to simulate insanity might instead report a profound religious epiphany. They would speak of the unity of all things, of the divine light, of pure being. The molecule, stripped of its cultural context, stripped of the drum and the fire, still carried the same message. It was as if the spirit was inherent in the geometry of the carbon atoms themselves. These researchers were unknowingly stepping onto the same path the shamans had walked for thousands of years, though with different maps in their hands. The shaman used the map of myth, speaking of deer and corn mothers. The scientist used the map of neurology, speaking of cortexes and optical nerves. But the territory they traversed was identical. They were both exploring the axis mundi, the center of the world where the human mind touches the infinite. The discovery of mescaline also attracted the attention of the artistic avant-garde. In the cafes of Paris and Berlin, the artificial paradise became a subject of fascination. If this white powder could unlock the imagination, could it not also unlock new forms of art? Painters tried to capture the impossible colors of the visions. Writers tried to find words for the ineffable. The molecule became a muse, a secret influence on the developing surrealist movement, whispering its chaotic beauty into the dreams of the modernists. However, there was a shadow side to this scientific appropriation. In reducing the cactus to a chemical, something was lost. The entourage effect, the complex interplay of the other alkaloids in the whole plant, was gone. The ritual container, the songs, the prayers, the community support, was absent. The experience in the laboratory was often colder, more clinical, and more prone to anxiety than the experience in the teepee. The set and setting of a white-walled hospital room was far less forgiving than the warm embrace of the desert night. The scientist looked at the subject through a glass darkly, seeing a patient exhibiting symptoms. Hefter and his successors had captured the crystal, but they had not necessarily understood the ghost within it. They had found the chemical letter, but they were still learning to read the spiritual language. As the decades passed, the vials of mescaline sat on the shelves of the laboratories, gathering dust, waiting for the next chapter. The world was plunging into the darkness of the world wars. The age of anxiety was dawning. But the crystal remained stable and pure. It was a time capsule of consciousness, a dormant seed of the 1960s waiting to bloom. The work of Arthur Hefter was the bridge. He built the span between the ancient medicine of the indigenous Americas and the modern pharmacology of the West. He proved that the visions were not magic, but chemistry, and in doing so, he made the chemistry magical. He showed that a few milligrams of matter could fundamentally alter the nature of reality for the observer. So let us leave the laboratory now. The gaslights are dimmed, the notebooks are closed. The crystal sits in its glass jar, catching the last stray beam of moonlight. It is quiet here, but it is a pregnant quiet. The genie is out of the bottle. The roots in the stone silence have grown into a crystal in the laboratory, and soon that crystal will be carried across the ocean again, to a garden in California, where a British writer is waiting to open the doors of perception wide enough for the whole world to see. The narrative now drifts from the cold, echoing halls of the German laboratory and the wind-swept plains of Oklahoma to a place of deceptive tranquility. It is a bright, clear morning in May, in the year 1953. The location is West Hollywood, California, a sprawling grid of stucco and palm trees sitting beneath the relentless azure gaze of the Pacific sky. We find ourselves in a private garden, a small enclosed oasis of green hidden away from the noise of the boulevards and the growing smog of the post-war city. The air here smells of jasmine and exhaust fumes, a peculiar perfume of the modern world. But within the garden walls, the chaos of the 20th century is held at bay. The sunlight filters through the leaves of the eucalyptus and the jacaranda, dappling the ground in a shifting mosaic of gold and shadow. It is a setting of profound domestic peace, a place where the birds sing their territorial songs and the bees go about their ancient business, indifferent to the philosophical storm that is about to break. In the center of this garden sits a man in a wicker chair. He is tall, impossibly thin, with a face that seems etched from parchment, an architectural face, composed of sharp lines and a high intellectual forehead. This is Aldous Huxley. He is 58 years old, a giant of English letters, a man whose mind is a vast, catalogued library of history, science, and satire. He is the author of Brave New World, a prophet of the dystopian future, a rationalist who has spent a lifetime dissecting the follies of humanity with a cool, detached wit. But today, the cynic is silent. Today, the intellectual armor, forged in the libraries of Oxford and polished in the salons of London, is about to be tested against a force it cannot categorize. On the small table beside him sits a glass of water. Dissolved within it is 0.4 of a gram of mescaline sulfate. The crystal, which we saw born in Hefter's laboratory, has traveled across the ocean and the decades to arrive here, in the hands of Dr. Humphrey Osmond, a research psychiatrist who is present as a monitor. The white powder has vanished into the liquid, invisible, tasteless, unassuming. It looks like nothing more than a glass of tap water, yet it contains the roots in the stone silence, the blue deer, and the midnight vigil, all distilled into a chemical key. Huxley reaches out, his eyesight is poor, a lifelong affliction, and takes the glass. He drinks. There is no drumbeat here. There is no fire in the shape of a crescent moon. There is no chanting shaman. There is only the polite clink of glass on the table and the distant hum of traffic on Santa Monica Boulevard. He settles back into the wicker chair to wait. The waiting is a strange interlude. It is the pause between the lightning flash and the thunder. For the first 30 minutes, the world remains stubbornly ordinary. The garden is just a garden. The chair is just a chair. The mind of the writer continues to chatter, analyzing, predicting, doubting. Is this it? Is this the great mystery? The golden rule of the experiment is silence, so he says little. But his internal monologue is likely a whirlwind of expectation and skepticism. But then, the doors of perception, a phrase Huxley would later borrow from the poet William Blake, begin to creak open. It does not happen with a crash, but with a subtle shift in the quality of the light. The shadows in the garden seem to deepen, to become heavy with a violet significance. The light hitting the leaves of the ivy does not just reflect, it seems to emanate from within the plant, a green fire that glows with an internal life. The intellectual armor begins to melt. The categories that the human mind uses to navigate the world, the labels chair, flower, wall, self, begin to dissolve. These labels are useful for survival. They tell us what to use, what to eat, what to fear. But they are also blinds, shutting us off from the raw reality of the object. Under the influence of the mescaline, the utility of the world falls away, and the being of the world rushes in. Huxley's gaze falls upon a small vase of flowers placed on the table. It contains a rose, a carnation, and an iris. In his ordinary state, he would have glanced at them, registered flowers, and moved on. But now, the glance becomes a gaze, and the gaze becomes a total immersion. He looks at the rose. It is a deep, velvety red. But to his altered eyes, it is not just red. It is a universe of color, a trumpet of absolute being. He sees the petals breathing. They are not static objects, they are dynamic events, pulsing with the same energy that fuels the stars. He sees the isness of the flower. This is the term he would later coin to describe the experience. Istigkeit, the sheer miraculous fact that this object exists, here and now, in this specific form. It is a revelation of the divine, not in the heavens, but in the botany. The rose is not a symbol of something else. It is the thing itself, and that is enough to bring him to the verge of tears. He looks at the carnation and the iris. He sees the delicate veins in the petals, the architecture of the stamens, the way the light is caught and held in the biological tissue. He feels that he is seeing them as Adam might have seen them on the morning of his creation, naked, fresh, unburdened by the history of names. The flowers are shining with an inner light, a lumen that seems to bridge the gap between the observer and the observed. For a long, timeless moment, Aldous Huxley ceases to be a writer, a Briton, or a husband. He becomes a pure eye, a vessel of perception receiving the glory of the garden. The experience shifts. He looks down at his own legs. He is wearing a pair of gray flannel trousers, a garment of utter banality. But in the mescaline state, even the mundane becomes miraculous. He stares at the folds of the fabric, the way the cloth drapes over his knees. He sees in those folds the intricate drapery of Renaissance statuary. He sees the robes of the seraphim in a Botticelli painting. The flannel is no longer just wool. It is a landscape of texture and light, a hierarchy of shadows that holds the weight of a cathedral. "This is how one ought to see," he whispers to the tape recorder. "This is how things really are." It is a profound realization for a man of the West. Our culture teaches us to value things for what they can do. The chair is for sitting, the car is for driving, the pants are for wearing. But the mescaline teaches the value of being. The trousers are valuable simply because they exist, because they are a manifestation of the energy of the universe. The divine shine is not reserved for the chalice or the cross. It is present in the flannel, in the wicker, in the dirt. Huxley enters the house. He walks into his library, a room lined with books, the collected wisdom of humanity. He looks at the spines of the books, the works of art history, philosophy, and science, and he laughs. It is a gentle, tragic laugh. To his heightened eyes, the books look dead. They look like rubbish. He realizes that they are just words, just grubby little labels, trying to pin down a reality that is fluid and infinite. He sees that he has spent his life building a wall of words between himself and the world, and now, for a few hours, the wall has crumbled. He understands that the symbol is not the thing symbolized. The word water is not wet. The word God is not the divine. He listens to music. He plays a recording of Mozart. But the music, usually a source of great pleasure, feels thin. It feels constructed, human, too organized. It interferes with the silence of the isness. He prefers to look at the grain of the wood in the door frame, seeing in the swirling lines of the timber a beauty that surpasses the greatest symphony. The natural world, the accidental world, holds more weight than the curated world of art. Later in the day, Dr. Osmond drives him into Los Angeles. They venture out of the sanctuary of the garden and into the beast of the city. One might expect the noise and the ugliness of 1950s urban sprawl to shatter the delicate state. But the mescaline alchemy holds strong. Huxley looks at the cars stopped at a red light. He doesn't see traffic. He sees rolling sculptures of chrome and light, chariots of fire reflecting the sun. He looks at a drugstore, a neon-lit temple of consumerism, and sees the colors glowing with the intensity of stained glass. Even the ugliness is transfigured. The miracle of naked existence is present even in the smog. He realizes that the beatific vision is available everywhere, at all times, if only the doors of perception were cleansed. This day in the garden marked a pivotal cultural turning point. It was the moment the ancient root met the modern mind, and was articulated with the full force of the English language. When the effects wore off, when the isness faded back into just a rose and just trousers, Huxley did not simply return to his old life. He sat down and wrote. He wrote The Doors of Perception, a slim volume that would land like a meteorite in the intellectual landscape of the 1950s. Before this book, the psychedelic experience was largely trapped in the medical journals as psychosis, or the anthropological texts as primitive ritual. Huxley liberated it. He framed it not as madness and not as paganism, but as mysticism. He connected the mescaline experience to the writings of Meister Eckhart, to the Zen masters, to the Christian mystics. He argued that the drug was a tool, a gratuitous grace that could lower the reducing valve of the brain and allow the mind at large to flow in. The impact was seismic. The book took the experience out of the laboratory and the reservation, placing it into the hands of the counterculture. It became a manifesto for a generation that was suffocating under the gray flannel conformity of the Eisenhower era. Young men and women, reading Huxley's elegant prose, realized that there was a world beyond the picket fences and the factory jobs. They realized that the real world was a construct, a thin veneer painted over a universe of infinite magic. Mescaline became a tool for the artist, the poet, and the seeker in the modern age. It influenced the music, art, and philosophy of a generation hungry for meaning in a post-war world. The rock band The Doors named themselves after Huxley's title. Artists began to paint what they saw behind their eyelids, the fractals, the melting clocks, the vibrating colors. The psychedelic revolution of the 1960s did not begin in Haight-Ashbury. It began in that wicker chair in West Hollywood, with a middle-aged Englishman looking at his pants. But there is a complexity here, a shadow amidst the light. While the West intellectualized the experience, searching for expanded consciousness and cognitive liberty, the plant itself remained humble. The ancient quiet of the desert remained the true anchor. Huxley's experience was profound, but it was also solitary. He was alone in his garden, cut off from the community, the drum, and the lineage. He was a philosopher exploring a museum of the mind. This was a departure from the peyote road of the Native American church, where the experience was always communal, always rooted in prayer and mutual aid. The Western approach became one of individual exploration, the trip. The trip was about my mind, my vision, my enlightenment. It was an inward turn, sometimes bordering on narcissism, whereas the indigenous ceremony was an outward turn, towards the tribe and the earth. The biography of the molecule had split into two parallel streams. In the desert, the peyote ceremony continued as it had for thousands of years, sacred, solemn, a matter of survival. In the cities, the mescaline, and later LSD experience became a cultural explosion, a rebellion, a chaotic search for a new way of living. Yet the plant itself remained indifferent to these human distinctions. It grew in the silence of the Chihuahuan desert, slowly adding rings to its body, synthesizing the alkaloids in the dark. It did not care if it was eaten by a Comanche warrior to heal a wound, or by a British intellectual to solve a philosophical puzzle. It simply offered the key. It was a slow-growing teacher, indifferent to the frantic pace of the modern seekers who sought its wisdom. As the sun sets on that day in 1953, we see Huxley standing in the twilight, a man changed forever. He has seen the burning bush in his own backyard. He has touched the hem of the absolute. He has proven that the roots in the stone silence can bloom even in the concrete jungle of Los Angeles. The genie is fully out of the bottle now, and the world is about to become a much stranger, more colorful place. The History for Sleep notes the irony. The most ancient of sacraments has become the newest of novelties. The circle is widening, but the center, the silence, the stone, the root, remains the same. We return finally to where we began, completing the great circle of time and geography. We leave the cluttered laboratories of Europe and the manicured gardens of Los Angeles, allowing the narrative to drift south, back across the border, back into the embrace of the deep time that only the desert understands. We find ourselves once more in the Chihuahuan desert, standing amidst the limestone and the dust. The day is ending. The sun, a heavy orb of molten gold, dips below the jagged horizon, painting the western sky in streaks of bruised purple, burnt orange, and fading indigo. The long, violet shadows stretch out across the earth, cooling the heated stones and signaling the return of the silence. It is quiet here. It is the kind of quiet that feels like a physical presence, a weight that settles on the shoulders and slows the heart. In this stillness, hidden beneath the tangled branches of the nurse plants, the mesquite, the creosote, the prickly pear, the peyote cactus remains. It is a survivor. After centuries of persecution by empires and inquisitors, after decades of scientific dissection and extraction, after years of cultural appropriation and misunderstanding, the small, spineless button still clings to the earth. It is a testament to the stubborn persistence of life in the face of impossible odds. But the world around it has changed. The threats are no longer just the hooves of the peccary or the edicts of the Spanish crown. The modern world is encroaching. The land is being scarred by root plows clearing the brush for cattle grazing. The aquifers are draining. The fences are multiplying. And a new hunger has arrived, not the reverent hunger of the starving hunter, but the consumptive hunger of a global market. The cactus is now an endangered species, listed as vulnerable, its populations dwindling under the pressure of illegal poaching and habitat loss. The gardens of South Texas and Mexico, once so abundant that one could walk for miles without stepping off a button, are becoming fragmented and scarce. Yet, amidst this crisis, there is a profound resilience. The plant is protected by those who still revere it as the flesh of God. The Native American Church continues the vigil. Somewhere tonight, in a remote corner of the reservation or a hidden valley in the Sierra Madre, the fire is being kindled. The crescent moon altar is being shaped from the ash. The water drum is being tied. The songs are rising into the night air, those high, descending melodies that mimic the wind and the cry of the coyote. The lineage of the blue deer is not broken. It is being held, fragile but alive, in the hands of the faithful. The biography of mescaline reveals itself to be a perfect circle. It started millions of years ago as a chemical defense, a bitter alkaloid synthesized by a prehistoric plant to ward off the teeth of predators. It was a shield. Then, in the hands of the first people, it became a Kia shamanic tool to unlock the doors of the spirit world, a bridge between the human and the divine. In the eyes of the colonizers, it became a demona, diabolical root, to be stamped out and feared. In the sterile light of the laboratory, it became a specimen, a molecule of carbon and nitrogen, to be analyzed and synthesized. And finally, in the cultural upheaval of the modern age, it became a symbolic banner of cognitive liberty, a catalyst for art and philosophy. But beneath these shifting human labels, medicine, poison, drug, sacrament, it remains simply what it has always been, a condensed vibration of the earth. It is the desert distilled into flesh. It is the patience of the stone made edible. It does not care about our laws or our theories. It only cares about the rain, the sun, and the slow, rhythmic turning of the seasons. As you drift towards sleep, let your mind settle on this image. Picture the cactus growing slowly in the moonlight. The desert floor is silver and gray. The air is cool and smells of ozone and sage. The plant sits there, unmoving, growing at a pace that is almost geological, a few millimeters a year. It is indifferent to human time. It does not measure its life in hours or paychecks, but in the slow drift of the constellations overhead. It holds the memory of the stars. The atoms that make up its body were forged in the hearts of ancient suns, scattered across the cosmos, and gathered here in this quiet valley. It holds the secrets of the soil. Its taproot reaches deep into the limestone, drinking the mineral water that has filtered down through the rock for centuries. It is a living library, a repository of ancient wisdom waiting in the stillness. There is a comfort in this endurance. In a world that feels increasingly fast, fragmented, and noisy, the peyote cactus offers a reminder of a different way of being. It reminds us that there is power in stillness. There is strength in patience. There is a deep, unbreakable connection between the green earth and the human mind, a bond that cannot be severed by concrete or chemicals. The roots in the stone silence are our roots too. We are not separate from the nature that birthed us. The narrative ends, but the life of the desert continues. The owl takes flight on silent wings. The kangaroo rat skitters across the sand. The wind whispers through the thorns. And the cactus waits. It waits for the rain. It waits for the sun. It waits for the next pilgrim who comes with a humble heart, ready to listen to the song of the blue deer. The desert sleeps. The vast, starry dome of the sky rotates slowly above, and within the silence, hidden in the shadows, the vision endures. It is a small, green flame that will not go out, burning quietly in the night, watching over the world as it dreams. Sleep now. The story is told. The circle is closed. The root holds firm. The silence returns.